Yeah, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mike and Lauren Live.
Hello.
High five. So tonight we have a very special guest.
We're pretty excited.
His name is Jim Collins, and you know him from jlcollinsnh.com. And we are so excited to have him here. Tonight we are going to talk about the highly controversial rent versus buy debate. A lot of you have asked why we rent our house instead of purchasing it. We've gone over that briefly in the past, but tonight we're going to dig into it a little bit more, and with the help of Jim, we're going to go over some common misconceptions about the rent versus buy question that everyone has on their mind. So without further ado, let me introduce Jim Collins. He can say hello, and then I'm going to kind of introduce the topic for the night, and then we'll open it up to questions towards the end. So here we go. Jim, you are live. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Lauren.
So tonight we are talking.
Oh, there I see on the screen.
Yes, yeah. So real quick, you may notice it's a little bit different tonight. We're doing a Google Hangout instead of a Google Live event. There is a subtle difference. So the audio may be slightly out of sync. There's just nothing we can do about that to do the telecommunication thing. But there are some things I can change. I can change the volume level of Lauren and I can change the volume of Jim. So if you have any problems with seeing or hearing, please let us know in the chat, and I can make adjustments on the fly, so we can go from there. And same to you, Jim. If you have any problems, let me know, and we can press pause on this thing. So I have to move over this way because I have something special tonight. In lieu of doing the Google Live event, since we're doing a Hangout, we can do some slides here. And what I wanted to open up with, this is how this conversation got started. Jim has a blog post called Why Your House is a Terrible Investment, and in it he outlines a lot of reasons why doing the math on the rent versus buy scenario is very important. It's not just a cut and dry. I know growing up I always heard that you always buy your house, and actually I just realized this is why we don't try new things for the first time. I just realized the camera wasn't on us when we were talking. So now you're back to us. So this started from a blog post from Jim's called Why Your House is a Terrible Investment. And quickly before we get into things, I want to kind of highlight some of the reasons in that blog post that he lays out that maybe you haven't thought of. And to do that, I did something a little new tonight, and we actually have some slides we're able to do. So I'm going to show you real quick some slides, and then we'll get into it, Jim. I have a few questions for him. So without further ado, what does a bad investment look like? So we're going to do a little role play here, and imagine we are two people sitting on a bench, and we're talking about different types of good investments, and this is what he outlines in his blog post. And the question comes up, well, if that's what makes a good investment, how would we describe a bad investment? If we could outline all of the things that would just make an investment a horrible decision, what would that look like? And here are some of the things that he outlines on his blog. The first is it should be a relentlessly ongoing drain on the cash reserves of the owner. It should be illiquid. We'll make it something that takes weeks. No, wait, even better, months of effort to buy and sell. It should be expensive to buy and sell. We'll add very high transaction costs. Let's say 5% commissions on the deal, coming and going. Let's say it should be complex to buy and sell. That way we can ladle on lots of extra fees and reports and documents that we can charge for. It should generate low returns, certainly no more than the inflation rate, maybe a bit less. It should be leveraged so that if the price goes up a little bit, leverage will magnify this and people will be convinced themselves that it's a good investment. The flip side of that is any losses are also magnified.
By the way, Mike, none of these points are showing up on your screen.
On mine?
Or on the screen I'm looking at.
You actually, you know, the problem, you are about 30 seconds behind on that. Are they popping up now?
There's one just popped up, yeah.
Yeah, you're a few seconds behind. I forgot to tell you that. Got two more quick at the end here. It should be subject to the fortunes of one country, one state, one city, one town. Actually, let's make it one neighborhood. Imagine if our investment could somehow tie its owner to the fate of one narrow location. That way the risk could be enormous. You know, if a plant closes or a street gang moves in or the government goes crazy with taxes or an environmental disaster happens nearby, we have an investment that not only crushes its owner's net worth, but does so while they're losing their job and income. And our final, reason that we could come up with just for a horrible investment is it should be something that you can never really own. Since it's something we are going to give to the government the power to tax this investment every year, owning it would be just like sharecropping. We'll let them work it, maintain it, pay all the costs associated with it, and as long as they pay their annual rent, he means taxes actually, we'll let them stay in it unless we decide we want it, we being the government. So some very compelling reasons to, this double switcher thing is kind of weird for me. So some compelling reasons to not invest in a certain type of asset. And of course, that was a tongue-in-cheek kind of example of real estate investing. All those were, different factors that you would consider a home to be. And so, Jim, if you could kind of explain to us how did this blog post start, and where are you coming from? It seems like everyone you talk to, and the pendulum is somewhat swinging the other direction recently, but especially in the past decade or so, it's common wisdom that if you're not buying your house, you're losing out on equity, and you're throwing your money in the garbage every month. So where are you coming from, and how did this blog post start for you?
Well, you kind of just put your finger on where the blog post comes from. I got kind of tired of listening to the quote-unquote common wisdom that buying a house is always a good investment. And this is separate from discussing whether or not it's a good idea or a good lifestyle choice or something that you might want to have. But the whole concept of whether this is a good investment just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And so tongue-in-cheek, I sat down one day and I thought, let's look at this as if we would look at any other kind of investment and see how does it stack up. And then I kind of rattled off the things that you listed there, and I think there were a few more in that post. And I hit publish, and the next thing I know, I was getting the most hate I've ever gotten from anything I've published, and also the most love.
Right. Well, as James Altucher, is that how you pronounce his name? I can never get there. Altucher?
I think it's Altucher.
Altucher says, the housing is an American religion, that it's something that we would put up there with almost our faith in, religion.
Kind of the American dream.
Right. The American dream is, even the way we're sold it, you start with a starter house, and then you upgrade to a bigger house as you have kids, and then a nicer house, and then as the kids leave the nest, you buy something a little smaller. It's what we're told to do growing up. And so my question to you, I have two, and I think they're kind of misconceptions that are kind of the root of all of these factors. My first is, when I tell someone, you need to do the math on whether it's better to rent or buy, they say, well, if you're renting, you're not building equity. And after our conversations together over the past year and some email exchanges, it almost seems to me like equity to you is almost synonymous with opportunity cost. Could you speak to that a little bit of what role opportunity cost plays in the rent versus buy debate?
Well, you covered a lot of ground there, and there are a couple of things. First of all, it's going to cost money to live wherever you live, whether you're renting or there's a house. So it's a misnomer to say that you're throwing money away on rent. You are getting something in exchange, a place to live. By the same token, you are going to have expenses tied to that house. Now, some of them are obvious, like the interest that you're going to pay on your mortgage, assuming you have one. You're going to pay maintenance repair on that home. You're going to pay real estate taxes on that home. And then as you build equity, this is I think where people lose sight of the real impact of the numbers. As you build equity, there's a cost to that, to having that money tied up in the house. And the financial term is an opportunity cost. So if you achieve the goal that many have of having your home paid for and no longer having a mortgage, which is a fine goal, you have to then look at how much money you have tied up in that house and what could that money otherwise be doing. For instance, if you have a $100,000 house and you own it free and clear, that's $100,000 that is not otherwise engaged. And there's simple ways to evaluate what that opportunity cost is. you simply pick a proxy of where that money would be, where you would have it invested otherwise. And if we want to keep like to like, an obvious proxy is something like a REIT fund, real estate investment trust fund. Vanguard has one that I used to be in that I kind of like if I were going to do that, and it pays a 3.5% dividend. So you say, all right, that $100,000 that I have tied up could be earning me $3,500 a year. Now, some people will say, well, gee, but the house might go up in value. Now, it might. The real estate investment trust could also go up in value. So we have no way of knowing which of those will outpace the other. Let's consider that a wash, and so now you have an opportunity cost, looking at it very simply, of $3,500. That's a real cost out of your pocket to maintain that paid-for house.
So you're saying that looking at the appreciation of a house, what we're trying to get, when you see your house appreciate, let's say if it were to go up $100,000 in value, instead of seeing $100,000 in value to you, you should see a $3,500 loss of opportunity cost. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or is that oversimplifying it?
Well, you'd certainly see $100,000 in value, but that money is tied up. So you at any given point with any investment, you should always be asking yourself, is there something better I could be doing with this money? And what might that be? And to the extent that there might be something better or something different, you have a built-in opportunity cost. So certainly if you have a house that goes up $100,000 in value, then your net worth is increased by $100,000, and that is a good thing.
Right, but you were saying if you were to be invested in the real estate index fund, that could also go up, similarly in appreciation. So you're missing out on the dividends. Right. So then my next question is, it's either the argument of building equity, or it's the argument of tax deductions. So everyone knows that your mortgage interest is tax deductible, but there's a common misconception there. Could you talk about that for a second?
Well, I think the misconception you're referring to is, first of all, mortgage interest is deductible. But every taxpayer gets what's called a standard deduction from the government. So if you're a married couple, your standard deduction for 2014, and they adjusted upwards with inflation every year, but for 2014, you have a standard deduction of $12,400. That's if you do nothing. So unless your housing costs, that's to say your interest and your real estate taxes, are more than $12,400, there's really no deductibility advantage to owning that house. Now, there are some caveats to that. If you are generous with your charitable contributions, that too goes into what's called itemizing your deductions, which if you owned a house, you would itemize the interest you're paying on your loan, you would itemize your real estate taxes. And there are other things you can itemize and deduct, charitable contributions being the most common one that the typical taxpayer might have. So if you have a $12,400 standard deduction and you're giving away $10,000, well, now the bar is only $2,400, above which now your mortgage interest and your real estate taxes are beneficial. Does that make sense?
Yes. So just so I'm clear, because I want to make sure I understand it, is you have to pay more than $12,400. This is assuming you're taking you would otherwise take the standardized deduction. Your mortgage interest has to exceed $12,400 a year before it would ever make sense to have a mortgage just for the deduction.
Right, but you also get to deduct real estate tax, so it would be the combination of your mortgage interest and your real estate tax. And then if you live in a state, the taxes, of course, always make everything more complex. If you live in a high-tax state, New York, California, New Jersey, you're also going to have state income taxes that you can deduct if you itemize your deductions. So that might, in a perverse sort of way, make your real estate deduction more valuable. But if you live in Florida, as you do, or New Hampshire, as I do, where there's no state income tax, then you don't have that factor, so it's becomes a little simpler.
Gotcha. So when I was looking through your posts for your actual rent by analysis for your home in New Hampshire, I noticed a lot of your costs were much greater than we see here in South Florida. So I want to make clear: do you think it's always a bad investment to own your own home, or what is your point of that post? Because I think it's very controversial to say that Jim Collins thinks your house is a bad investment. Where's the line there? What are you trying to say? Are you really saying that all homes are bad investments, or what's your message on this?
That's a great question, Mike. And the why your house is a terrible investment post is one of the most widely read on my blog. And it's wonderful to have a post that's that widely read, but I wish people would also read the post on rent versus owning and how to run the numbers. The why your house is a terrible investment post, as you pointed out as you were kind of going through it, talks about some of the characteristics of a house as a building that are unattractive from an investment point of view. But you can look, it's a relatively simple thing to run the numbers on a house and compare it to renting. And there are a lot of calculators out there that do that, and those are fine if you find one that you like. I think it's a little bit simpler than that. So in my case, with our house in New Hampshire, when I run the numbers, and with both houses that I've owned, renting is much more financially attractive. In some areas of the country, that may or may not be the case. I think some places like Florida, evidently, from what you're saying, in the Midwest, where I'm from, it might be a closer horse ride. I also did a post on rent versus buy in Ecuador. Ecuador is a country I travel to on a pretty regular basis, and I've looked at real estate down there, and when you look at just the numbers there, it is more cost effective to buy than it is to rent in Ecuador. Now, there are other mitigating factors to that to consider that are unique to that country that we get into if you like, but maybe
so
not
if
best.
if you're looking at the numbers and you see it's more favorable financially, mathematically to buy, is that a green light for you to make that decision, or you think it's more emotional? Like, obviously, we listed all those reasons at the beginning, the entire blog or the essay that you wrote about you listed 20 different reasons that were non necessarily strictly financial things that kind of weigh you down. They're psychological, they're emotional. How do those factor into your decision?
Well, I would say this. I would say that that money is not the only reason to make a decision like buying a house, or a lot of decisions in your life. But I think it behooves you to make sure you understand what the numbers are telling you. So I would suggest to anybody who's considering buying a house or who is renting and prefers to rent that you run the numbers. And the numbers will tell you very clearly, if you do that, where the chips fall and whether the house is more financially advantageous or renting is more financially advantageous. And then once you know that, you're in a position to not make a rational decision, but to understand the financial implications of whatever decision you make. So for instance, when we sold our last house, it was very clearly financially advantageous to rent. As it happens, we also wanted to rent. So those two things aligned, and it made the decision obvious. If I'd run the numbers, and the numbers had said, you know what, it is actually more financially advantageous to own, now I have a more complex decision. But the numbers will tell me exactly how much more it would have cost me to rent if that was the case. And now I'm in a position to say, okay, it's going to cost me X number of dollars more to rent, which is what I want. Am I willing to pay that premium? Or to turn it around, if I ran the numbers, if I was renting and I wanted to own a house, and I run the numbers, and the numbers say, well, owning a house is going to cost me more than what I'm paying to rent. Okay, now I know that. And I know specifically how much more it's going to cost. And now I can make a decision as to whether that extra money is money I'm willing to spend in order to own that house. So you're making a more rational decision, or you're able to make your emotional decision in a better informed fashion.
Where I think the controversy is coming from is your opinion of renting or buying, I think, is fundamentally different than a lot of people where you view renting favorably. I think a lot of people, whether or not they actually believe this or they've just been told to believe this, they want to own their own house. So you're looking at it like when you're talking like that, you're saying, I can look at it and say renting is going to cost me this much more per year or per month. I know I can make a rational decision now, but I prefer renting, so it's worth it to me. I guess that's just the way you take it both directions. If you prefer to own your own house, you need to look at it and say it's more expensive or it's cheaper to own the house, but like you said, make a rational decision about it. What is it about renting that is so attractive to you? Why are you drawn to that scenario?
Well, let me address the first point of what you said, and then I'll remind me, and I'll talk a little bit about why I like renting. But I also wrote a post called Roots versus Wings, and it's kind of a companion to everything that we're talking about. And I think that fundamentally there are two different kinds of people, and people can be on either side of this at different points in their life. So there are some people who put great value in setting down roots, and these are people who tend to like to own houses for obvious reasons. Other people tend to prefer to have more flexibility in their life, and that's wings. They like traveling and moving to different places. I think it's a matter of deciding which of those two you are and pursuing it along those lines. For instance, when our daughter was young, we were more roots kinds of people, and we owned houses. Now that she's grown and out of the house, we don't have that requirement, and I'd much rather have, this kind of gets into answering your question on why I like renting, I'd much rather have the flexibility that renting allows. I can live in a place for a while and enjoy what that has to offer and what that environment has to offer, and then when I'm ready to move on, I can easily pack up and move on.
Understood. Yeah, I mean.
Plus, in my case, it's a lot cheaper, so I have extra money in my pocket.
Oh, our camera died. Can you see me now? Yeah, we're back, right? Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. What I'm looking at is a time delay kind of thing. So.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that, guys. Our camera
right
died.
Now on the screen I'm looking at is me talking.
Yeah. Okay, we're back on. All right, so I kind of want to wrap up the real estate portion of the interview. I think what it comes down to is, you need to run the numbers. Would you say first and foremost you need to run the numbers, and then from there it's an emotional decision for you? You can make a rational emotional decision if there's such a thing. But taking into account those reasons that you outlined in your essay that maybe you didn't think about that. That's what I really wanted to kind of highlight is you had a lot of reasons in that essay that I had never really considered. So it's not cut and dry. Even if the math favors one over the other, there are still other things that you should consider before taking the leap into home ownership. Would that be a fair review of your thoughts on it?
I think it is a fair review, and if you'll allow me to, I'll kind of review a little bit myself.
Yeah.
Whenever you're making a life choice, I think money is not the only consideration, but it's an important consideration. And I think with anything, you should run the numbers and understand what your decision is going to cost and how it compares to alternatives that might be there. So if you're interested in buying a house, I wouldn't say don't buy a house. I would say run the numbers, see how owning that house stacks up against renting, assuming that's what you're doing, and then you know what it's going to cost in comparison. And you might find out that actually buying the house is cheaper, and if you also want to own a house, that's a wonderful thing. But if you find out the house is more expensive, now, as we talked about, you have an idea of what you're going to pay for that lifestyle choice you want to make. But then the second point, it goes back to that, to the post you were reading about why your house is a terrible investment. I think you have to be, there is so much propaganda, and I don't think that's too strong a word, out there touting the value of home ownership without looking at it a little more deeply. For instance, the reflex, well, of course your interest payments are deductible. Well, yes, but as we discussed, you also have a big standard deduction. So maybe it's not as beneficial as it seems. So you can look at that and you can say, you know, do I really want to take on this particular kind of an investment? If you do, and there are some people who just definitely want to own their own house, by all means go and do it. But there are also a lot of people that I hear from who are almost pressured into buying a house. They reach a certain age, or they get married, or maybe they have children, and the world around them is telling them, well, of course you need to buy a house. Well, not necessarily, and there are other things to consider before you make that decision.
So a one-liner for me would be, I've always been told that a house is an investment no matter what. You're saying sometimes a house is not an investment.
I don't think a house is really ever an investment, and to the extent that you think of it as an investment, as that post points out, it's really not a very good one. But it can be a good lifestyle choice. I mean, when we moved to New Hampshire, we bought a house, and we bought it in a good neighborhood with the good schools because my daughter was in second grade, and it was the expensive choice to make. It was an expensive indulgence, if you will, but it was one that I could afford, and the benefits were benefits that I wanted. But I went into it with my eyes wide open, knowing that I was paying a premium to indulge myself in owning that house. And then when I didn't need that house anymore, I didn't need the school district, I didn't need the space, as my daughter moved on, then you do something different. But you just don't accept as gospel that owning a house is always a financially good thing to do. It probably rarely is. Sometimes it's a good lifestyle thing to do.
Excellent advice. All right, well, let's open it up now for general Q&A. We have a couple of questions backed up in the chat, so I will start with those. And if you have questions for Jim about anything else, you know, life, business, money, go ahead and put those over in the chat room. To start, our first question, actually we'll go back a little ways to one more real estate question. It says, when buying a house and living in it, what about renting a spare bedroom or two? Is that still a bad investment? So what are your thoughts on the roommates or the Airbnb nowadays side of things in homeownership?
Well, I think certainly if you own a house and you want to rent out a spare room or do an Airbnb kind of thing, you're obviously going to generate cash flow that you didn't have before, and that's a good thing. I would be careful about saying I am going to go out and buy a house and this is going to justify the financial decision to do it. But if you own a house and you want to generate cash flow from it, by all means. And certainly, if you go to my post on rent versus own and you look at the various categories and you want to run that calculation, and you say, okay, well, I know I'm going to buy a house with this extra room and I'm going to do an Airbnb thing, you can put in some numbers on that side of the ledger and see what it tells you.
Excellent. All right, our next question is from Kevin R.
Which, can I add that I'm very glad that Kevin R. brought this up, because I actually brought up this post to Mike, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, about kind of covering it.
His question is, how much have your children followed in your footsteps? One of Kevin's favorite posts is how I failed my daughter and a simple path to wealth.
Well, Kevin, first of all, I only have one children. And that's my daughter Jessica, and she is 22, and she's out of college and out of the house, or out of the apartment in our case, and on her own. I think it is too early to tell whether she's going to follow in my footsteps. Have you read that post? I think one of the mistakes that I made with her is that I think this financial stuff is so incredibly important and can be such a powerful tool in helping you have the fullest possible life with the greatest number of options, that I think I pushed it on her too hard and too early. And in fact, the whole blog comes out of a conversation from my daughter, and I think she was maybe 15 or something at the time, and I was, again, lecturing her, as she would say, on this stuff, and she stopped me and she said, Dad, I know this isn't important, but I just don't want to have to think about it all the time. And the little light bulb went off, and I thought, that's probably true of most people. They know financial stuff is important, and they don't want to think about it all the time. You know, I'm the aberration. I mean, financial people like this financial stuff like me, and maybe the listeners and you might, we're the aberrations. I mean, most people are out there curing diseases or building businesses or whatever they're doing, and money is a very secondary thing. And so the blog is written, hopefully, if I've accomplished my goal, for people who know it's important but don't want to obsess about it. So I try to make it as simple as possible. Sometimes, to go back to Kevin's question, my daughter will make comments that make me think that she's paid more attention than she lets on. So the jury's still out, but I am hopeful.
Well, I think you've done a great job. One of the things I really appreciate about your blog is how you tell a story and keep things simply laid out step by step. And not only that, but the concepts that you teach simplicity. And that was an eye-opening thing for me, where investing and money in general we're often taught is too complicated to even just hands off. It's too much. It's too complicated. Where you're the voice in the darkness saying, hey, it can be simple. This is how to do it simply, and set it and forget it. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad if I can comment on that, Mike. First of all, thank you for that, because that's very much one of the goals I have. And I would also say for your audience, I think it's unfortunate, and to the extent that it might be intentional, maybe even despicable, that the financial industry tries to make this seem so complex. So here's the truth. The financial industry and the investments in it are incredibly complex. I mean, they're so complex that when we had the last implosion and market crash in 2007, there was the Treasury Secretary saying, he didn't understand what credit default swaps are. Here's the good news. All of that stuff is meaningless for us. We don't need it. So you can take 99% of what Wall Street is peddling and just throw it in your mental trash can. The 1%, which interestingly enough is the simplest, and I'm talking about index funds, the 1% that really matters to you couldn't be simpler, and moreover, it is more powerful and will give you better results than all this nonsense that Wall Street is creating, not to make their clients wealthy, but to make themselves wealthy.
Right.
So I guess the answer is it is very complex, but the complex stuff we don't even need to think about.
Well, that's good to know. We have a couple more questions. May need to do these rapid fire. We have 3 right now. But the first is Jim considering purchasing a little house in Ecuador?
Well, first of all, Jim would have to be considering moving to Ecuador, and that is a consideration, actually. I don't know. We've lived in New Hampshire for about 15 years now, and I love New Hampshire. It's been a great experience. But as I alluded to the roots versus wings thing, we're wings kind of people, and we like change, and 15 years is a long time to be in one place, at least for us. So at some point in the not-too-distant future, I do see us moving just for a change of scenery, and Ecuador is one of the considerations. Now, whether I would buy a house or not, as I mentioned, I did a post on that, and if you want to, Mike, you might link to it in the bottom, but in Ecuador, as far as I can tell, it is cheaper to own than it is to rent, but there are mitigating factors to that, and one is that you're not in a country that is quite as stable as the U.S., and I'm a little concerned about owning something that is as illiquid as property in an environment like that. I'm actually concerned about owning something that's as illiquid as that in this country, so you can imagine how I feel about it in a place like Ecuador. And the other thing is that buying in Ecuador is a much more challenging process than it is here. One of the good things about the real estate market in the U.S. is that if you're looking at a house to buy, you know what the asking price is, and you know that that asking price is the same that's put forth for every other potential buyer. Now, you might negotiate a different price than that, but at least you know what the starting point is, and the playing field is level. In Ecuador, that's not true. There's something that they kind of laughingly refer to as the gringo tax. So If you're a gringo, you are going to be asked to and expected to pay much more for a given piece of property than a local. And in fact, I have a friend, an Ecuadorian friend, who lives in a little town, little fishing village named San Clemente, but he's not from San Clemente, and he was in the process of buying some property there. And even he, being an Ecuadorian, was subject to the local San Clemente tax because he wasn't a local guy. And he was having one of his local friends scout the properties and do the negotiating and what have you while he stood in the shadows, because he knew if he did it himself, even as an Ecuadorian, he'd be paying a premium. So it's a different kind of world. Doesn't mean I wouldn't necessarily buy, but I'd have to look. I'd do my little analysis, and I'd see just how big the advantage to owning was, assuming that was still true when I made if I were going down there, and then I'd weigh that against the challenges of buying and owning in a place like Ecuador.
Interesting. Very interesting. So they don't have any sort of like MLS service down there then?
No, there's no MLS service. In fact, one of the interesting things is that when you go out with a realtor, sometimes, as I understand it, the sellers will say, okay, I want to sell this house and I want $50,000 for it, and I won't sell it unless you give me $50,000, and then the realtor can go and sell it for whatever they can get, and that's how they make their money. So if they can sell that house for $100,000 to somebody like me from out of the country, and maybe I don't know any better, well, they've just made a $50,000 commission on that house.
Wow.
Even if I've run the numbers and it's quote unquote cheaper to rent, I have to realize that when that comes time for me to sell that house, I've just paid twice what it's worth, and unless I can sell it to another gringo, no local is going to be silly enough to pay that kind of money.
Great. Let's go on to the next question. Jim, do you still recommend 100% Vanguard stocks for someone in their mid-30s?
Yes, with some caveats. First of all, I don't think it's so much a matter of your age. I would recommend 100% stocks to somebody in their mid-30s who was working and was planning to continue to work. Now, a lot of readers of my blog want to track to retire early, or they have, and so for some of those people, by the time they hit their mid-30s, they've been retired for 5 years. So I look at it more in terms of where your cash flow is coming from. So 100% stocks is considered very, very aggressive and very, very risky. And what mitigates that risk in my mind, and why I would say to my daughter in her 20s or somebody in their 30s who is working and intends to continue, you have cash flow coming in, and assuming that you have a good solid savings rate and you're using that cash flow to invest, that cash flow that gets continually invested with each month or each paycheck mitigates and smooths out what's inherently a very volatile ride when you're in the stock market. Now, once you stop working, once you retire, whether that's at the age of 30 or the age of 65, and you don't have that earned income coming in that you're investing and using that cash flow to smooth out the ride, you need something else to smooth out the ride, and typically that's bonds. So, for instance, at the moment, I hold 75% stocks and 25% bonds because I don't have earned income coming in any longer. If I were to retire at 35, I would do the same thing. I would add bonds to smooth that, to make that, to provide that smoothing effect that my cash flow had before.
Interesting.
And by the same token, you might have somebody who retires at 30 and doesn't have cash flow for 5 years, and I would suggest that they ought to have a bond component that's should be based on their own personal risk tolerance. And let's say 5 years, they get some wonderful job offer, they get bored or whatever it is, and they go back in the workforce, and they're making a good salary, and now they have cash flow, and they're saving and investing money again. Well, that might call for your allocation to shift again.
What? Sorry, I cut out there for a second. Our camera may die here one more time in a second. I just have to turn it back off and turn it back on.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Just going on record to say thanks to each of you. We love Mike and Lauren videos, and I've read nearly all of J.L. Collins and H.
Well, I like Brad.
What do you think?
Brad's obviously a very astute fellow.
Yeah. What do you think of the fact that Vanguard's mid-cap fund has outperformed the total market and small caps over the past 10 years?
I think that's a reflection of the last 10 years. And one of the reasons that I own a total stock market fund is I don't know what the next 10 years are going to bring. Things go in and out of fashion. So small cap funds and mid cap funds that can outperform large caps for extended periods of time, and then the wheel turns and large caps outperform, and I have no way of knowing what's going to happen over the next 10 years, so I own it all.
Good to know. We have a question. Can you give us a teaser for some upcoming JL Collins NH posts? What do you have on the boilerplate? Is it boilerplate? Well, that's not a word, is it? What's coming out?
So obviously Brad's not as astute as I thought he was, because he thinks I actually planned this out. I do have three, I guess, that are in the works now. I have 2 case studies coming up, which I haven't done a case study in a long time, and I think they're a lot of fun, and I like doing them. And as it happens, there were 2 interesting situations came to my attention recently, and I was kind of on the lookout for a case study or 2 to do. So hopefully I'll have one of those up later this week, and then another one coming after that. And then the other thing I'm thinking of doing, and I haven't actually decided if I'm going to, when we headed out to Los Angeles over the Christmas holidays, I mentioned in the post I put up just before we left that I was going to take the train back from Los Angeles. We flew out there together, and I had never taken a cross-country train trip, and this was the opportunity, and I did that. That was 75 hours on the train. A couple of the commenters on that post said, "Wow, you got to tell us about the train trip." And so I'm kind of thinking about maybe doing that. I always hesitate with the travel posts because I can see that the readership of those is not nearly as strong as the financial ones, and that's not surprising because people think of my blog as a financial blog, and that's what it primarily is. But I like doing the travel stuff, and some of my readership seems to like it. So I might do a post on the train trip. Okay, and I'm not hearing anything coming back at me. Did I lose you? Okay. Well, Mike, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm not hearing anything coming back from you, so
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
now I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
So did you hear my last bit about the post on the train trip?
Yes, so I heard all that, and everyone heard that.
All right.
Our camera, when it gets to this point, it just gets so hot, it just starts freaking out. So let's do a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up for the night.
Okay.
When will the Mike and Lauren video series featuring Jim be posted? So this is a good question. We were actually talking about this today. Basically, Jim, if you want to, or I guess I'll just say, and then you can kind of talk about where you're at with it. We're trying to time the 2 with Jim's book publishing. So in the book publishing world, things move slowly, and in the motion graphics world, things move slowly. So unfortunately, we're both moving slowly together. So I guess that's a good thing. But what I do think we can have coming up is we can have some teaser videos coming up soon in the next month or so. We had how long did we talk after we did the series? We talked for about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
With Jim, and we got it all on camera. So we'll do some videos with that, and then the actual stock series itself. Jim, could you give us an update of just, I don't know what, I mean, it's so hard to give even a ballpark, but where are you at with the book and publishing, and what's your plan?
Well, first of all, just in case, it occurs to me as I'm listening to you that maybe not everybody listening to us knows what we're talking about. So.
Oh yeah.
Last spring, Mike and Lauren came up to the beach house where we were spending the summer and did some recording based on, I think, the first 12 posts on the stock series with the idea of making some short videos about them, which I think is a cool thing. So that's the project that we're talking about, and we wanted to tie this with the introduction of a book. It's also based mostly on the stock series, but some of the other stuff on the blog that I've been working on for, it seems forever. And it is a long, slow process, but hopefully it'll finally be done and out sometime this spring. And from what Mike tells me, that should dovetail nicely when he gets the editing done on all these videos.
Yep, exactly. So hopefully some teaser videos very soon, and then
we had a fun time in Wisconsin.
Yes, we did. We had a lot of fun. We stayed. How many days? We were with you 2 days.
I think two or three. And
yeah, because we were 2 full days and then half a day the day after that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite places in the world. Incidentally, it is my wife's sister and her husband own this house on the beach in Lake Michigan in Wisconsin, and it is it's right on the sand, and the beach stretches for miles in every direction. And I grew up in Chicago and near the shores of Lake Michigan, and so it has a particular place in my heart, and I've always loved Wisconsin. It's a beautiful state. I've never lived there. So they are very gracious about letting us use it pretty much whenever we want with a little advance notice, and that's where we were when you guys came up, and it was a great place to get together.
It was absolutely beautiful, for sure. We had a lot of fun. Let's see. Do we have time for one more? Let me go through.
Almost drowned your cameraman.
Oh yeah, Brian Parker, who you guys have seen in our friend is a trip video, and he's been in the carbonation video, all kinds of videos. The lake was actually just about 60 degrees, I think we found out it was, and he went overboard in a kayak and lost his breath and
knocked the wind out of him.
Knocked the wind out of him, and he couldn't swim, and he couldn't.
He had a bit of a panic attack in the water.
Yeah, so close call with Ryan Parker, but he survived and
unless
is better
his mom
for it.
is watching, and then everything was fine.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end. We have a few more questions, but I'm afraid that they're just too in-depth to go into.
You have one here that I'd like to add.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, you have the chat right there too. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's from Riffman42, and I think this is an interesting question. He says, do you switch to bonds when you early retire, or do you recommend a gradual transition leading up to retirement? And I think you can do it either way. It kind of depends on your risk tolerance. I'm trying to remember what I did personally, and I want to say, because I don't like owning bonds, because bonds smooth out the ride, but they also don't perform as well as stocks, and I have a pretty high tolerance for the volatility and the risks, so I think what I did is I just waited until I actually pulled the trigger and retired, and then reluctantly added the bonds to my portfolio. But that's very much about me and how I view risk and versus reward. From what I read psychologically, most people are much more concerned about loss than gain. I guess I'm wired a little differently. I'm more concerned about gain, and I'm willing to put up with the loss. So depending, you have to know yourself, as the saying goes, and where you fall in that continuum. But for a lot of people that I talk to on the blog through the comments, a lot of people are very, very risk averse, and the volatility is troubling, and they ought to have a gradual transition, I would think. And maybe even if you're really concerned about the volatility, there's nothing wrong with holding a little bit of bonds to smooth it out along with your cash flow from your employment while you're working too.
Gotcha. Might as well do one more from Dust from Dust. What are your thoughts on finding dating while working towards FIRE? Financial independence, early retirement. Was Jane always on board, or did you have to convince her, or how did that relationship work? Let's make that our last question. We'll end here, and then we'll do a closing after this.
Okay, let me just real quickly jump up because Riffman42 had a follow-up question. Let me just answer that real quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I'll jump down to just. And his follow-up question was, it seems with interest rates so low, bonds aren't the best investment right now, and I absolutely agree with that. You know, I have a whole post on bonds if what I'm about to say goes over anybody's head. But basically, when interest rates fall, the value of bonds rise, and the corollary of that, of course, is that when interest rates rise, the value of your bonds will fall. And interest rates are at historic lows, and most people, including me, think at some point that they are destined to rise again. Now, I hasten to say that predicting interest rates is a fool's game at best, and people have been predicting that for the last 5 years, and they keep going down and down and down. But at some point, it'll turn. So I do think bonds aren't the best investment now, and they're a little bit risky. But again, I don't own them for that reason. I own them because they smooth the ride with stocks.
Right.
So let's see. Oh, dating. Dust from dust. Well, dust from dust. First of all, I've been married for 32 years, so I'm a little bit out of date in the dating scene. I will tell you that when my wife and I were dating, and of course this is ancient history and before internet and before there were all these sources of information on early retirement investing, and I was just beginning to invest and making a whole bunch of mistakes along the way, but we never talked about financial things when we were dating, and we never considered it as we were planning to get married. And I think that's a huge mistake. I highly encourage people to talk about it, because the single biggest thing from what I read that causes problems in marriage is questions about money. As it happens, we got extraordinarily lucky. My wife and I have very much the same attitudes towards money and investing and living. I don't want to say frugally necessarily, because that's a loaded term, but living well within our means so that we had money to invest and build wealth with. But we didn't know that going in. Sometimes I think maybe we knew it on a certain level, a certain intuition as you get to know somebody, maybe without consciously recognize it. I recognize this was not a woman who squandered money, for instance, but we never talked about it. But I would recommend that you do.
Very good advice. That's interesting. I just wonder if you would just not have been attracted to someone, like you said, who squandered money, so it just wasn't an issue. But
yeah.
So let's call it ending there. We definitely had a great time. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Jim, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciated it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to everybody who watched. I'm honored that you'd take the time.
Well, we would definitely love to have you again. I know we talked earlier about maybe we could come up with some more fresh.
I wasn't there for your conversation.
You weren't even here. What do you?
No, I don't know.
Like philosophical. I don't know what the term would be. Conversations, and maybe we could have some in the future. So if you like this video and you want to see more of Jim, be sure to thumbs up and leave your comments below if you're watching this afterwards. And Jim, I'll send you the link once this is posted, that if you want to go on and respond to comments, that would be great. And I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.